So we have finished the landscape lesson in the photography class at Hummy's World, and I want to now show you how to take those landscape photos and really make them pop. This is a photo that I took in Kauai, Hawaii of Waimea Canyon, and I chose to use this one because it does have some blues in the sky, some greens and some reds for us to observe as we make these colors pop. Always bring your photos. I always recommend and tell everybody to do this. Bring your photos into a working file. That is just a new file that you create, and you drag your photo into it or open your photo into it. The reason I encourage you to do this is because I've seen too many times where people accidentally save over their original file. So definitely don't just open that up from your files and begin working on it. Drag it over to a new file. And when you do this, you can also be saving it as a PSD to go back and edit it later if you so choose. I've gotten to where now I won't ever share online a photo unless I make the colors pop, especially the landscape photos, because after you play with it and see the before and after so many different times, you get to where you can't share it unless you play with it first. And it's really a lot of fun. In a previous lesson in the photography class at Hummy's World, we learned all about the levels, and we learned that you can just hit Control L and your levels box will pop up, but that makes a permanent change to that layer. And we learned that it's best to use new adjustment layers. So I'm going to choose this new adjustment layer icon for levels, and you can see that from what we learned in the previous lesson, we're going to need to take this black slider over. My photo here is a little bit, actually a whole lot, overexposed, and so I always, step one, do a levels adjustment layer and check my levels. I can double click here to get that adjustment palette. I couldn't think of the word, the adjustment palette, to minimize out of my way. Then the next thing that I always check is a new adjustment layer for hue and saturation. And in this case, I generally only change the saturation, and most often I'm going to bump up the saturation. Now I want to encourage you to be very careful in bumping up the saturation, because you're going to make that photo look unrealistic. Now there is actually something in Photoshop Elements kind of in a hidden area, and also less hidden in the full version of Photoshop, and it is called Vibrance. I really wish Photoshop Elements would add a new adjustment layer for Vibrance. What Vibrance does is it only saturates the lower saturated pixels. And so you have, in your original image, you'll have, if you look here, these greens, these brighter greens in here, they're already highly saturated, whereas the darker greens in here are not as highly saturated. So a vibrant slider adjustment only saturates those lower saturated colors, and it leaves those things that are already highly saturated alone. But we don't have that option here in Photoshop Elements. It's somewhere else, and that's going to be a separate tutorial. It's too difficult to show you how to do that in this particular lesson. So if you move this all the way over, well, no, let's not go all the way over. Let's go about in here. You're going to see that effect, how the things that are already saturated a lot are becoming oversaturated. Not a good thing. Let's zoom in a little bit for you. Definitely, definitely not a good thing. That's why the Vibrance slider is so wonderful. But we can still go ahead and bump up the saturation here just a tad. I never go too far because you just get unrealistic. And look at, like in here, I'm observing the already oversaturated or well saturated greens, and I'm making sure they don't go too far. And so that will work for that one. So I always check levels first. I don't know why. I've just developed this pattern. I've felt that it works best. Then I check hue and saturation, and then I check brightness and contrast. And so in here I can bump up the brightness if I need to, and the contrast. Now sometimes, most often, I'm going to leave the brightness about where it is because the levels kind of takes care of that. But the contrast, I like contrast. That's up to you. The more contrast you have, the more of a high key image that you have. And I have here a description of it. The brightness makes the photo just lighter or darker. It's kind of different than exposure because it makes the whole photo lighter or darker. It's hard to explain that, but contrast affects the difference between the light and the dark. And so that's why I just like the contrast. I like high contrast photos. So here we have, I'm going to use the eyes. We have the before and the after. Just like that, I've made this photo into a wow pow photo. But we can take it a little bit further than this. I'll go ahead and make it invisible, and I've got some keyboard shortcuts down here to show you. Highlight the layers and press Control E and it merges everything. Okay, let's go try that. Turn these back on. I'm going to hold down my Control key and select all of these layers to highlight them, and then I'm going to hit Control E. And this puts all of those layers onto one layer. I've lost all of my adjustments. I can't go back and change my photo anymore. I'm going to hit undo. You know, right now what's so great about the new adjustment layers, if I think I'm looking at this and I think, oh, I think I've saturated it too much, I can always click on this little gear icon and, you know, edit that down just a little bit. But if you merge them all together, you're no longer going to have that ability. So let's look at the next keyboard shortcut. Shift Control E. It merges together all visible layers. So first we had Control E. Now we're going to have Shift Control E. So let's say we only had these two layers as visible, and we did Shift Control E. Oh, you got to actually be on one of them. Shift Control E. Is that right? It's not working. Shift Control. Oh, I'm not pressing E. Okay. Shift Control E, and I was pressing Alt instead of the E key. Duh. Okay, you see how it just merged what was visible. These two layers I had invisible. And but we still don't want, if we had all of them visible, and we didn't even have to select them all like we did with just Control E. If we had them all visible and did Shift Control E, it would put them all on one layer, just as before. And once again, that makes it so we can't go back and re-edit or preserve anything. So I have another keyboard shortcut for you. This one you're gonna love. The Shift Control Alt E combines all visible layers into a new layer. Let's go play. So we got all of these visible again, and we do Shift Control Alt, and now, I've used my 3 middle fingers to do that on my left hand. I got to reach over with my right hand and press E, and it merged all of them and it put the layer right here. Now I'm going to hit undo because I really don't want that layer there. So that's a good point to show you. You probably want to be on the top layer when you do this. Shift Control Alt E, and it puts that new layer. It merged all 4 of these visible layers and put them on a new layer up here. So now we have another layer that we can begin working with and tweaking a little bit more, but we've preserved all of these. If we want to say, well, wait a minute now, you get a little further down and you want to go back to a step where you were before, you have them here, and you can save this as a PSD file. Maybe, you're just like me. Every time I uploaded a digital scrapbooking layout to a gallery, as soon as I do, I'm like, oh, I see a mistake. For some reason, as soon as we share things, that's when we see something that we need to change. And if you've gotten rid of this PSD file, you can't easily, and all the layers, you can't easily go back and do that. So Shift Control Alt E is your friend. But it also allows us to do a lot of other fun things with the photos. We have now taken and merged all 3 of these, or all 4 of these layers, and put it on a new layer, and now I can go and change my blending mode to overlay. Now that doesn't look too good. It may for some photos, but I can lower the opacity, and now watch, I'm going to make this invisible and visible, and I can give it a little bit more punch. And so now I have a whole nother look with my image here, and given it even more pow. You have to be a little careful though, because in some images you're going to begin getting noise if you make too many changes, especially noise in the darker areas. And so you want to zoom in, and I think I'm still okay here. But so that is making it really go pow. I want to go back. I'm noticing I've lost my sky, and this is why we love preserving our layers. So I'm going to actually delete this and go back a step, just like I said that we could do. I have here this brightness slider, and if I adjustment layer, and if I turn that off, I can see that I can still see my sky, but once I because I brightened it, once I turn that back on, I see I've lost my sky. I really don't want this adjustment on my sky. And so I'm going to go ahead and get black, because black conceals from my foreground color. Grab a brush tool and brush over my layer mask. Make sure you click on the layer mask to make sure you're brushing on the layer mask and not anywhere else. And of course, if you get it a little bit on the areas you do want it to affect, get your white and then go back and forth. And now that preserves that blue in the sky a little bit. Now I can go ahead and hit Shift Control Alt E again and change that to overlay or soft light. Just go through all of them to see what it does. Let's see, linear burn. Ooh, no. Some of these are just not good. But ooh, now see, that really brings out my sky. So maybe I want that just to make my sky pop. And so I might go and add a layer mask to this and get that brush tool and black and conceal everything but the sky, because I saw how that brought the sky out. Of course, you would want to do this a little bit, better zoom in, because I'm not doing a very good job. It doesn't matter on the bottom, but on this line right here, it kind of really matters. I can't spend the time doing this right now, even though it's bugging me. I might have to do it anyway because it bugs me. So we have black, so I'm going to make sure we get right up in there on that line. And white, to make sure it applies to all of the sky. In this case, it's kind of a definitive line, and I could probably use my selection tools to fill this in. Anyway, I would make sure that all was filled out a little bit better in there. Now, before and after, and we're only making the sky pop. Of course, I definitely will go back and fix that selection later when I don't take up video time doing it. And as I said, whoopsie, there, I got my trees back again, going back and forth. Probably will use my selection tools to, do this. Select the area and then fill it in black and white. Okay, so there we have it. The before and after for just the sky. That is pretty cool. So maybe I'll make this invisible, and I wanted to use blending modes to apply to just the bottom area. So I make this one invisible and go ahead and do a Shift Control Alt E again. Oops, let's be right here. Shift Control Alt E. Gotta make sure you're on the right layer, and use those blending modes that we had, maybe that we liked for the lower layers, and turn on this one, which applies to the higher layers, and now we have the best of both worlds, the sky and the other. So here's before blending modes and here's after. Mostly affects the sky. Let's turn this one up a little bit. I don't like the way it makes it too dark. This one, it's not too bad. You just gotta keep going back and forth, going which way do you want. So there we go. Here is our original, and here is our popping. And I want to show you a few more things in Photoshop Elements before we finish. I'm going to go back and get this original layer and duplicate it, just so I can tuck this away, because what we are going to do next will permanently change this layer. And so if you go to the Enhance drop-down menu, Adjust Color, and choose Adjust Color Curves. I love that Photoshop Elements has added this dummy mode of color curves. If you have the full version of Photoshop, to learn more about color curves is a lot more complicated, but definitely something worth spending your time to learn. We are in the default setting. We'll start there. Color curves, the basics for color curves, you have your before and after, is to make this graph to be an S-curve. If it's an S-curve line on the graph, it makes for one of those really cool photos. And each one of these sliders affects the one of these middle boxes, and the mid-tone brightness and the mid-tone contrast affect the mid-tone little box right in the middle. So if we move the mid-tone brightness, it goes up and down and changes our line. You can kind of see what it's doing to the photo up here too. And if we move the mid-tone contrast, it's going to go right and left, and you're going to see what it does on the photo above. But if we just leave them that middle slider alone, and this highlight slider, which is this box here, and move it to the right, we begin to get some of our S-curve. And the adjust shadows one is this box, and so if we move that to the left until we get kind of an S curve, you can see up here the before and the after. And so we've lost our sky, but we've got a really cool photo going on here. Before I click OK, I can show you that you can choose one of these other defaults. This is darken highlights. Increase contrast is fun, but you would basically do the same thing. Go after making that S curve. And there's increase midtones. And that one's actually kind of pleasant, not too drastic. And there's this one here. So you can go, and I like the contrast one. I told you before, I'm a high contrast person. So you can go ahead and choose your settings and click OK. And here is our original, and here is the one adjusted using the color curves. As I said, we've lost our sky now, so I would want to move and do things further to using these adjustment layers, as you saw earlier, to bring the sky back in somehow. But it really makes for a realistic edit. When you're editing it yourself like I did before, you can really get some unrealistic things going on. You can go and continue to edit this further if you want. You might want to use this as a starting point and then go through and check your levels, hue and saturation, and your brightness and other things. I want to go back to this one and review something else that I never use, and I'll show you why, but I want you to be aware what it is and what it's for in Photoshop Elements, and that is the Smart Brush tool. The Smart Brush tool has these choices up here in this drop down box. You see blue skies, which I showed you how I made my sky bluer, and greenery, and there's all sorts of choices of things that you can use in here. And the reason I don't use these is because I tend to do these the manual way rather than utilizing these, but they are kind of fun. So if we go back to the all-purpose, and let's say we want to do blue skies, I'm going to select that one, and I want to make my sky blue, so I'm just going to draw here. Of course, it went way up there. I'm on the wrong layer, that's why. It still went way up there. There, now we're acting a little bit better. Oh, what this is doing is using the selection tool to select that area of my photo. Now you can see what it did. It made an adjustment layer. That's all it did. It made an adjustment layer, and it used the selection tool, the quick selection tool type tool, to make a mask and make an adjustment. This one happens to be a gradient fill adjustment. So what's good to me about the smart filter area is that you can go in here and play with them and then observe what it's done and go, oh, okay, that's cool. And then go back and do it manually yourself, you know, because we can set our blue to whatever we want to set it to, you know, and change things around, and then we can actually go back and get our brush tool and, you know, actually draw black and white in here, you know, and whatever we want to do. But you can use it to educate yourself on ideas, but then go and just grab it yourself and make those yourself. This one was what, a gradient fill, and here's your gradient map. And so you just have to learn how to make your own gradient map of blues. Of course, right now it's applying to the whole photo, but I'm just showing you quickly, you know, how you can do these things yourself manually. And, you know, they have one in here for greenery, and you see if we apply it to just this green area of the photo, it does, you have to almost turn it off and on, just mainly saturate the greens only. Let's say I wanted to saturate only the greens. If I'm going to saturate only the greens in my photo, I'm going to go get a new adjustment layer for Hue and Saturation, click Master, go to Green, the green channel, and then I'm going to bump up that green saturation. And then I'm going to go get my brush tool and apply it to, well, I'm going to have to only that lower half. I don't want it to apply to my sky. And now we have the exact same thing going on. It's applying to this and not to the other areas. So you just go and use the Smart Brush tool to get ideas, and then head back out to do it manually yourself. I think that's about all I'm going to show you. Let's get rid of some of these funky layers and go back to this version. And actually, I just don't like this layer adjustment very well. I'm going to move it down, make it very slight, but I like what it's doing to the sky. It's a little too much in the sky. Got to remember that things have got to be realistic. I wonder if soft light, see what it does to the sky. I bring that back up. Nope. The color burn, ooh, I had it on multiply. Color burn I kind of like a little better. So there we go. There's my fixed photo. And I would use my crop tool and crop it down and do a save as. And I would have my new photo. So that's actually a little dark. New see, it's bugging me. No, I'm going to actually go back and do another new adjustment layer for brightness and contrast. Not contrast, brightness. It got dark when we applied the blending mode. And then I don't want to mess that up on the sky, so then I would probably make a selection of this, holding down my control key, and Control V, no. And then I don't want that to happen to my sky, so I'm going to get my brush tool and brush over that. So it doesn't make the adjustment to the sky. There! Now I'm much happier. It's a little bit brighter. I don't like dark photos. Have fun.